Studies in the Gospel of Mark. W. J. Hocking. 36b. The appearance of Jesus. 1914-167. Jesus on the mountainside was not in ignorance of the precarious position of his followers. From the place of prayer he saw them toiling hard in rowing. May we not believe, indeed, that they in the extremity of their trial were the subject of his intercession? At a later day we know he said to Peter, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you that he may sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for thee that thy faith fail not. Luke 22 verses 31-32. So that we have reason for boldly thinking that the Lord was the unseen helper of these distressed ones throughout that night. We believe, in short, that he who prayed that the faith of Simon might not fail prayed in like manner for the faith of the 12. Their trial was permitted to extend through the long hours of darkness that the tribulation might work out patience, and patience experience, and experience hope, the hope that mocketh not ashamed. Such being the divine purpose, there was the occasion for much soul discipline throughout the night watches. The apostles must have often thought, and possibly often spoken of their absent master. How they then desired the presence of him who had formerly stood up in the boat during a similar storm, and rebuked the wind and the sea. Surely they must have had some expectation that he would come to their relief. Blessed servants would they be if when their Lord did come he found them watching, counting upon him in faith that he would not utterly forsake them. But he came to them not in the second watch, nor in the third watch after, nor was it until the dark hour before the dawn that the bright and morning star appeared. But they when they saw him walking on the sea supposed that it was an apparition and cried out, for they all saw him, and were all troubled. The Lord's method of approaching the disciples was altogether superhuman. See note. The manner, it is needless to say, was unexpected on their part. Among all the wonders related in the Old Testament there was no parallel to this one. At the national crisis which arose at the passage of the Red Sea, Jehovah, in the morning watch, looked forth upon the hosts of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and delivered the people of Israel from their foes. But the wonder on the Galilean Sea was of another order. Note, it is said that the Egyptian hieroglyph for an impossible thing is a figure of feet walking on the water. Compare Job 9 verse 8. End of note. The sight of the master of the elements making his way to them across the heaving billows must have been overwhelming to these men. There was, in this instance, no forerunner to prepare the way of the Lord, to make his path straight. Unannounced, he approached the little band, treading his way through the surge of the mighty waters. They were troubled on seeing him thus, for as yet they had not understood Jesus who he was. They did not realize that the sea was his, he had made it. Truly, his way was in the sanctuary, but equally his way was in the sea and his paths in the great waters. Psalm 77 verses 13 and 19. They had yet to hear his promise, I will not leave you orphans, I will come to you, though he anticipated the enunciation of it by his appearance to the storm-tossed mariners, as he had done in a former day to the 3 bound men in the furnace of fire, Daniel 3, coming, as we may say, alike through fire and water to the relief of his own. But when the Lord came across the sea he sought a response from his disciples. He came within their ken, and he would have passed them by. He looked that his appearance should awaken some impulse of appeal to him. Compare Luke 24 verse 28, for they all saw him, as Mark tells us. There was, however, no intelligent recognition of their master on the part of the apostles. We read that they cried out in fear, for they supposed they saw a phantom. The vision on the waves, they thought, was not real, an apparition, the creation of their own imagination. Such was the delusion of the little company, notwithstanding the power they had lately received and which they had exercised over evil spirits. The appearance of their master filled them with more alarm than the fury of the storm seems to have done. That fear, the fear of the unknown, possessed them, of which Eliphaz spoke when he said, Fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face, the hair of my flesh stood up, it stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof, an image was before my eyes. Job 4 verses 14-16. The Lord's word of good cheer. But the Lord never failed in the supply of his gracious help in the needful measure and at the needful moment. The disciples uttered no direct prayer to him for aid, but their cry of fear and distress arrested him, and instantly he wrought for their relief, allaying their fears with his word. He straightway spake with them, and saith unto them, be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. The Lord's first word, on this occasion, was addressed to the apostles, while in the previous storm it was first addressed to the waves and the sea. The actual necessity, therefore, for the Lord's interposition was distinct in the two cases. In the first instance, there was imminent peril to be averted. In the second, a tempest of fear was sweeping over the men's hearts, their courage, nerve and assurance were apparently exhausted. Then, the Lord remarked upon their lack of faith. NOV His words show there was a lack of peace in their hearts. It would seem that in the one case the chief trouble was without and around, while in the other the more pressing need was within the troubled hearts of the disciples. At any rate, we have the historical fact that the Lord's words, with their threefold message from the waves, were addressed to His distracted followers. He said to them, 1. Be of good cheer, courage. 2. It is I. 3. Be not afraid. 1. The servant of Jehovah was commissioned to bring consolation to Israel, Luke 2 verse 25. This he did individually as well as nationally. There were many hearts stricken with fear among those with whom the Lord came in contact during His ministry. And we find the exhortation be of good cheer was one He loved to speak. Cheer is that comfort of heart which springs from implicit confidence in the love and power of God. And who could impart this sustaining virtue like our Lord? Besides the present occasion, Jesus used these words in the following 4 cases, 2 being cases of physical weakness and 2 of mental distress, 2 being in the midst of trouble, and 2 full of apprehension of what was imminent. A. To the sick of the palsy whom the 4 men of faith laid at His feet, Matthew 9 verse 2. B. To the feeble and trembling woman who touched the hem of His garment, Matthew 9 verse 22. C. At the close of His valedictory address to His disciples on the night in which He was betrayed, in the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world, John 16 verse 33. D. In the hour of great persecution at Jerusalem, the risen and ascended Lord stood by Paul and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome, Acts 23 verse 11. 2. In the next place, the Lord, by His words it is I, corrects the error of the apostles regarding Himself. Most probably they failed to recognize Him, because they were not expecting Him to come to them at that particular time or in that particular manner. Hence they imagined they saw a phantom until the Master said, It is I. Similar cases of non-recognition occurred after the Lord's resurrection. When Jesus appeared to Mary and spoke to her, she supposed Him to be the gardener until He called her by name, John 20 verse 15. And again, when He subsequently presented Himself in the midst of His disciples and said, Peace be unto you, they were terrified and affrighted and supposed they had seen His spirit, Luke 24 verse 37. Speaking generally, we may say that it is the latent incredulity of man's heart which prevents him from accepting the operation of divine power and love in superhuman ways, and such sluggish comprehension was often displayed by the apostles. The Lord dispersed the unbelief of those in the boat by a word which awakened their dull memories to a recognition of Himself. He is one whom they knew. Hence His words were, It is I. It was as if He said to them, Your Master and Lord is before you. And it will be remembered that He used similar words to them after His resurrection, Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself, Luke 24 verse 39. 3. The third exhortation to the agitated disciples was, Be not afraid. It is one of the many offices of perfect love to cast out fear, 1 John 4 verse 18. And the Lord during His ministry often used His assuring words of love and power to deliver trembling ones from the bondage of fear. The sense of His presence was and is all sufficient to banish the dread of coming calamity. The Lord knew this when He gave the verbal promise of His abiding presence to those He was leaving in the world, Lo, I am with you always. And the pious heart knows this from experience when he sings, O Lord, Lord, Thou art enough. The mind and heart to fill. Thy life to calm the troubled soul. Thy love its fear dispel. The apostles realized the same blessed truth on that stormy night. For after He had spoken to them these words, He went up unto them into the boat and the wind ceased. The Lord's word of comfort was succeeded by His act of deliverance. Callous hearts. At this miraculous display the apostles were beyond all measure amazed, for they bethought not on the loaves, for their heart was hardened. T.S. Green's rendering. Thus they failed to exercise that degree of faith and confidence in their Master which might be expected from men who were privileged followers of Jesus and eyewitnesses from the beginning of his ministry of many phases of his divine power. The Lord exhibited before them his personal control of the unruly elements, and they were filled with wonderment such as the multitude often displayed in their unreflecting ignorance. Mark 2 verse 12. Like Israel of old whose tendency was to forget Jehovah and their deliverance from Egypt, Psalm 78 verses 7 and 1, the anxieties of the moment obliterated the marvelous mercies of the past from the minds of the disciples. Even the miracle of the previous afternoon, in which they had the honor of being distributors of the Lord's bounty, was forgotten by them. Such is the natural disposition of our hearts, for they were but men of like passions with ourselves. This failure of the apostles is said to be because, 1. They understood not the loaves, and 2. Their heart was hardened. The verb used in the text for understanding has been variously rendered, but it appears on the whole to imply the putting together of matters in the mind and heart in order to ascertain by spiritual reflection their true significance. Like other scriptural words, it seems to be employed with great breadth and with various shades of meaning. It occurs, for example, in the address of Stephen. Speaking of Moses slaying the Egyptian, he says, he supposed his brethren understood how that God by his hand was giving them deliverance, but they understood not. Acts 7 verse 25. So also Joseph and Mary understood not a certain saying of Jesus, Luke 2 verse 50. The Lord opened not the minds of the disciples that they might understand the Scriptures, Luke 24 verse 45. It became true of Israel nationally in the day of their visitation that they hear not, neither do they understand, Matthew 13 verse 13, and on account of their willfulness judgment came upon them, and the heart of the people waxed gross lest they should understand with their heart, Acts 28 verses 26 to 27. In this passage of Mark we are instructed that the apostles failed to glorify the Lord in a great crisis because they had not sufficiently considered the miracle of the loaves. They saw in the miracle the work of his omnipotent hand, but they neglected to perceive in it the intense love of his heart for needy men. They had been witnesses of and participants in the labor of feeding the 5,000, and that deed of mercy was done not only to satisfy hungry mouths but also to awaken slothful hearts. It was another proof that Jehovah himself was present in Israel giving his people bread. But the hearts of the disciples were so dull that they missed the significance of his presence, and consequently they lacked that source of comfort in the hour of their trial. If their hearts were not hardened, if they had but considered the loaves, would they have set limitations to the love and power of the servant of Jehovah? Would they have thought that he who had displayed omnipotence on the land lacked omniscience on the sea? Would they have thought that he who had showed such solicitude could so change in a few hours as to forget in their peril the band of servants whom he had chosen to be his companions? The Lord came over the waves seeking a spirit of fidelity and confidence in the hearts of the disciples, but he found instead deadly dullness and spiritual insensibility. There was hardness or blindness of heart in them as well as in the Pharisees, Mark 3 verse 5, in Israel, Romans 11 verses 7 and 25, 2 Corinthians 3 verse 14, and in the Gentiles, Ephesians 4 verse 18. Thus Jesus discovered no response in the apostles to the labors of his love, and when he delivered them from the fury of the storm, against which they were vainly battling, they were excessively astonished. If they expected deliverance at all, they did not expect it in that manner. However, their hard hearts were melted, and they that were in the boat worshipped him, saying, Of a truth thou art the Son of God. Matthew 14 verse 33. The lesson for today. The lesson of unwavering faith and confidence in the Lord is one needing to be learned again and afresh by us. We readily enough recognize the greatness of our foes and the weakness of our might, but not so quickly the power and grace of our friend and deliverer. The Apostle Paul considered the miracle of the loaves and of the waves, as it were, and has expressed the teaching of them in terms of the spiritual world for the comfort of us all. He wrote to the saints at Corinth, We would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning our affliction which befell us in Asia, that we were weighed down exceedingly beyond our power, insomuch that we despaired even of life. Yea, we ourselves have had the answer of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which riseth the dead, who delivered us out of so great a death, and will deliver, on whom we have set our hope that he will also still deliver us. 2 Corinthians 1:8-10, RV. Let us then exercise faith in face of the adverse forces of this world which we must needs encounter. He who has power to deliver has also sympathy for us in our infirmities, and can give us peace within before he gives peace around. And though we may not be immediately delivered, he will bear our infirmities and carry our sorrows. So that from our sea of tossing billows we may look upward to our intercessor on high, and say, Thou who hast trod the thorny road, wilt share each small distress. The love, which bore the greater load, will not refuse the less.